Okay. All right. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to introduce our guest today. We have David Deininger with us. Um, Dave worked primarily for the firm that's now known as TRO Young Brannon for nearly 30 years. He
They're now
left
Smith
in,
Group, actually.
oh, see, they got bought. So I can't even keep up with all the vagaries. Um, so he left in 2011 and started 2D Planning, which is his strategic hospital planning practice, which we're going to talk about today. And since then, he went back to school to get his master in healthcare leadership at Brown University, which helped him to clarify his personal business strategy. He has helped hospitals around the country and even the world with a focus on rural care. I met Dave in 2015 while doing research on hospitals for what would eventually become Mass Design Group's book, The Architecture of Health. Um, I was like just kind of totally taken by Dave's generosity and super interested in his business model as someone that's kind of eternally curious about how the different ways that we do architecture. So we invited Dave today because we're just inspired by the ways in which he's created a unique business as a sole practitioner. I know that a lot of us are sole practitioners, many of us have small practices, but I think what's so unique about what Dave's up to is that it's mission driven while respecting his expertise, being compensated appropriately, setting his own schedule. Like I could go on and on about all the things that are cool about it. Um, but the kind of format for today is just going to be a conversation between Dave and I. And to that, if people feel comfortable turning their cameras on, that'd be great. No pressure if this is when you eat or multitask or you're shy. But if you feel comfortable, it's certainly not like bad form to have your camera on. Like we'd love to see your face. Also, just feel free to jump in with any questions you have. If you feel comfortable, you can just unmute. If not, you can put it in the chat and I'll try and keep my eye on that. So, Dave, did I get anything else wrong in the bio? Did it sound okay?
No, it's pretty good. I didn't know who you were talking about, but
So modest. Um, okay. So I thought maybe you could start by just kind of giving us like the elevator pitch for your business 2D planning.
yeah, I think what's important to me is really providing strategic facility master planning, specifically services to rural, mostly underserved hospitals. Uh, and I created a kind of a charrette process that allows the engagement for me to be shorter in duration, much more engaged on site, and also at a lower, and high level, but also at a lower price point. That is a big payday for me as a sole practitioner, but I can undercut, healthcare planning firms and other architects. So it's a nice little sweet spot as far as a
Yeah,
price point.
I think this was like the thing that got me really excited. I had prepped some questions for Dave that we shared beforehand, but I'm thinking that maybe you could go into a little bit more detail and then we can kind of work our way back to how you started it. But I was just curious, kind of like what that looks like on the ground and, how you prepare for these, what I understand to be week-long engagements with hospitals in the kind of early stages of either ground up planning or additions, subtractions, etc.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually doing a charrette next week and anyone gets a special bonus point if they have any idea where Rushville, Illinois is. I certainly didn't. It's kind of between the Mississippi River and Springfield. Uh, Luckily, I used to go in person, kind of pre-pandemic, and I partner with a strategic healthcare planner. Um, and he is on site next week. I've been able to talk him into letting me do them remotely. So that's been kind of nice, less wear and tear on the, on traveling wise. But what I've been doing this last week, they sent me the site plan, they sent me floor plans, and this is a little 25-bed hospital, so it's pretty tiny. And then through the magic of Google, I can, go into Google Maps and I can tour around the hospital because it's all, been mapped in 3D. So that allows me to get a sense of kind of what the surroundings are. And then next week we'll have a kickoff meeting on Monday, go through, and usually we have a kind of a senior group of maybe 5, 6, 7 folks. So it's a manageable group. And we'll go through their priorities, what their goals are for the engagement. And then Tuesday, I really delve into the site and do, site analysis. I do a planning and kind of building analysis as well. And then try to look at a couple of different options that kind of meet their priorities. And then we'll have a meeting on Monday. We'll have a meeting on Wednesday that kind of where I can download a lot of the analysis, but then I can also kind of raise the various options and get a sense of, whether, can they purchase this adjacent site so they could expand in that direction, things like that. And any kind of landmines that I'm not that I'm not privy to. And then I'll just hopefully I'll choose a direction, and on Thursday I'll put a little more detail and refinement on that. And then on Friday we're really presenting a high level kind of vision for the site. This is what can they become, and very rarely can they afford everything on their wish list. So it's incumbent upon me to kind of work backwards and then phase projects that align with their priorities. And we do a high level financial model as well that allows them, so we can determine what their debt capacity is, kind of what their borrowing might be, because there's a lot of federal through the FDA low interest loans that these small hospitals can get. So, we kind of, and then John, the guy I do my work with, he's more in the world of strategy. So he's already done a dive into the demographics and into the demand, and then what their long-term growth might look like. And he translates that into space need for me. So I don't necessarily have to do space programming per se. And a lot of it is just rules of thumb that we use because we're at a high level, but it allows them to quickly then make decisions going forward with a plan in mind. Most of these smaller hospitals are just planning adverse, and by the time you get on site, I mean, this hospital next week in Illinois, the original hospital was a little peanut in 1922, and they added in 1952 and 1964, and they haven't really done too much, and they're on a very constrained site. So they're usually pretty challenging, but they all, I tell them they're all unique, but for the most part, most hospitals have the same problems. So we're usually just, trying to solve the same problem in a different context.
One of the things I think is really exciting about what you do is that, so, you're working within a typology of hospitals. I think many small firms have a typology that they focus on, whether it's single family residential, retail, like office renovations, whatever it might be. Some don't specialize, but I think, we can all appreciate the complexity within our, band of practice, or if we're broader, certainly there feels like complexity every time you jump into a project. I think hospitals are like the most complex thing I can imagine, both in they're almost, like essentially lab buildings. They have all these complex technical requirements, but then also they inevitably need to think about how they grow and shrink. And they're this accretion of like decades and decades of decisions, many of which were probably bad in the first place. So what I think is cool is it never felt to me like the type of thing that you could come in at the highest level and kind of come up with um, a thoughtful plan that still had some teeth, Like I thought sort of hospital design lived in the minutia of those technical requirements. And so I think one of the questions I have is, what is the output that you leave them with? And then just like, is that immediate? Like, is that the presentations you've been giving that week? Or is that a report that you follow up with?
Yeah, it was certainly different when I was on site. I was doing everything by hand. So by the end of the week, I had the conference room wall was plastered with all my 11 by 17s that I then had to put into a digital format. What's great now is that I can work digitally the whole time. So it's usually a PowerPoint, which includes a lot of John's demand work, the financial model. And then by the end of the week, I have virtually everything in digital format. So it can just be plugged into the PowerPoint. And sometimes there's some minor things that I have to tweak, kind of post engagement. But for the most part, we leave them on Friday with their jaw on the ground. So they have to have some time to, kind of, ruminate on it. And I must say that one of the things, the biggest shift I felt was after working in a firm for 30 years and primarily focusing on master planning kind of the last 15 to 20 years of that. And I always felt, I mean, I did a lot of master plans and I always felt certainly valued, but I always felt the client kind of was looking at me sideways saying, okay, is he going to game the process for a big project for his firm? Because, we don't make money in master planning in architectural offices. You're lucky to break even. It's really a kind of a loss leader marketing tool. And the biggest change now is that I have no investment in the outcome. Uh, if it ends up being something where, oh, they need to spend the money on a new electronic medical record or or buying a physician practice, something like that, and it's not even facility related, I'm fine. As long as we, come to, be able to help them with a solution that fits their needs. And suddenly they look at me as a unbiased, a little more independent, kind of a trusted advisor, that I have their goals in mind and not kind of in the back of my mind, trying to get a big project for the firm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like often as architects, we feel like even if there are like blatant conflicts of interest in what we're doing, we feel like we're a trusted advisor. I mean, because I think many of us, come to this from a very, um, we're coming to it as a passion. It happens to be a career, but we weren't likely pursuing it initially for the money.
Right.
Um, so, but it is nice, I guess, to be kind of completely liberated of the optics of a conflict of interest, because I think that matters. I I was thinking in thinking about what your deliverables are, I think one thing we talk about a lot in this group is, what are the ways that we do our work? And, both in terms of just like, so, simple things like efficiency, which lead to, profitability and all this other stuff, but also in terms of like a more quality product, how can you create the systems that make your work simpler to do and better, and maybe more fun? Maybe you spend more time on the things you care about once you've systematized some things. I
Right.
know you have created some systems and a very defined process for these charrettes. So I was wondering if you want to talk about some of those or share any of that with us.
Sure. So you want me to share the screen? That might be
Yeah, I
the
if you
easiest
if you're
way.
not able to, let me know and I can adjust the settings.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh, it's working.
Okay, great. Did you see the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the charrette process. I just wanted to, I went over it. This just shows the 5-day, kind of the outcome. But what I'm interested in and how I came across this as a process, look at the upper right hand, kind of that little diagram. And it comes from a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It was a Harvard Business Review business school book. It's probably 20 years old by now, but it helps you go through the process of differentiating your offering and your business. And it's blue ocean because, you want to be swimming in pristine blue oceans, not, shark infested red oceans. So you want to try to dodge any competition and create a kind of a space where you can differentiate yourself. So if you look at on the left, there's high, low. That doesn't mean good or bad. That's just relevant, a relationship to each other. But if you look at cost, so my 2D planning models in the blue. So I have a lower cost point, which is great for me, as with no overhead in the spare bedroom at home, but I can undercut, a firm. Time, I differentiated by doing it much quicker. Integration, I brought in, other consultants to talk about strategy and finance. So it's more of a 360. Also interaction, we decided to do it on site, almost, have them, we have the client be able to, for that week, come in and out of the room, and they can sit with us for the whole week if they want, or they can just come in and out. So that's a higher degree of kind of interaction. And then the last piece was the independence piece that I talked about a little earlier. So I think we were highly independent and kind of unbiased, but still providing, high quality kind of architectural planning services.
I need to do this for my business, like this exact, because I feel like this is not specific. I mean, this specific version is specific to your business relative to other healthcare businesses, but like I think this is so transferable across every typology. Like, how are you different than the competition? Which I just think not having had any formal business training, as most architects don't, it's like, I wish this would have come up in my or professional practice class.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems so incredibly simple and obvious, but when you actually track it on a little diagram, you're able to begin to, if the 2 points are too close to each other, think of ways that they can get separated. And it was really, really helpful for me when I was kind of launching, 2D planning. Some of the other tools, as Kyle mentioned, hospitals are tremendously complicated, and you can get lost in the weeds, and you can get lost and kind of paralyzed by the complexity. So, and it's also complicated for clients. Even though they understand a lot of the clinical relationships, they don't really know about facilities necessarily. So this was something I came up with as kind of a design philosophy at TRO probably 30 years ago. And that was really what I call the hospital reassembled. And that's the idea of taking all the spaces in a hospital and dividing them essentially into two big buckets. One being the clinical box. And that you can see in the diagram, that's the more rectilinear in the red. That's a universal planning grid. It's the right amount of headroom. It's really pulling a lot of the vertical elements to the perimeter. So stairs, elevators, as much as you can to kind of have you, because the things that are going to change in healthcare over years are the clinical things and updates. So if you can have more of a modular approach, then you can plug and play and still keep the same enclosure, but keep it more as an interior renovation type of a project. And then this is counterbalanced by what I term the public sequence. That's the entry, that's the lobby, that's the atrium, it's the public components. And those are more site specific, and they're also less apt to change. So you kind of have this counterpoint of something that needs to be more changeable, almost like a lab building. Think of a lab and how they're more modular and they just expect that there's going to be change over time with new grants and new research folks. But then the public areas can be more that can be something that can be more permanent. So that helps me to just begin to think on a much bigger scale. How am I going to approach putting a building together? Then once I've kind of got that big decision out of the way, then I develop these tools for what I call planning fundamentals, and I divide it into the site and into the building. So the site is really looking at a public and private side of the site, really look at different quadrants, because there's usually an emergency room quadrant, there's a back of the house kind of receiving, then there's the entrance, which is the main primary entrance into the hospital. And then I just like to leave a flexible kind of specialty quadrant that can accommodate outpatient, it can accommodate especially like cancer center, something like that. And then the fact that each quadrant has special entries, should have associated parking with them. And then the ability, again, to expand. So that's kind of the site. And then once I get into the building, the inner kind of clinical works, it's overwhelming. You can get on a large hospital and there could be 70, 80 different departments. And it's like, how do you juggle these? How do you figure out what relates to what? And again, I simplify, not to make it simplistic, but to make it more understandable and to help me just with relationships. So I divide them into what's called the D&T platform. That's diagnostic treatment. That's anywhere, any place, any location where a patient is either getting something diagnosed or getting treatment. So that could be any procedure, surgery, it can be the emergency room, it can be imaging, radiology, those types of things. And then the second bucket is all the inpatient beds. And there's kind of a basic, what's called a medical surgical bed. So that's someone who's recovering from surgery, and anyone else who's in the hospital usually is a medical patient. And they are just being observed. They're trying to figure out, kind of what's going on. And then but there are many different other types of beds. There's obstetrics, where women come in to get, to birth. There can be rehab beds, there can be pediatric beds, there's different levels and intensity of care. So there can be intensive care, that's an ICU bed. There can be behavioral health, there can be geriatrics. So a lot of different types of inpatient beds. And then I lump everything else into support. And these little diagrams are really just showing me kind of what some of the granular relationships, but it really helps me, again, to make it easier for my planning purposes, but also easier for me to communicate what I'm doing, to a client. And then
I've often
lastly,
thought about this. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I've often thought about this like, I don't know. A hospital is an extreme version, right? Because they're so big and so complex. And you're just like saying sometimes they have 80 departments, which my brain can't even like comprehend what those 80 are. But I've often thought about this with housing or houses, how there's programs that kind of like need to be enclosed and ones that don't. And so you have these sort of two buckets, and that like as soon as your brain can create that model, it unlocks, so many possibilities, right? Versus thinking about everything as like needing to be an enclosed space. So it's like at the beginning when you were talking about the clinical box, and then the public pathways, and then, but it's like you have to come up with so many models to account for all these scales of space and the granularity that sort of each one demands. So it's inspiring to see. And I also, while you finish talking through these tools,
yeah.
I wanted other people on the call to think about tools that they've designed for their practice that they may want to share with us, because like truly how we do the work is like my favorite thing to talk about with peers. So anyway, all of you who are here, if you have anything you'd like to share, I'd invite you to unmute after this next bit and tell us about it. Okay, David, sorry, keep going.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, and then the kind of the last thing that really guides a lot of my planning work is what does it look like in the ideal? What's the ideal stacking? And occasionally I can get kind of close out of the chaos. Here's a hospital in Freehold, New Jersey, kind of on the, can you see my cursor? Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
So here's the existing basement, existing first floor, and then this was my proposed. So what I, in essence, did was I put a new building right out front here. So that's my clinical box. And kind of some, in the in the ideal world, you really want no patient in a lower level, like a basement or kind of subterranean. And you can see in this existing, the green is the diagnostic treatment. So there was a lot of stuff in the basement. This is a little unusual because this was a cancer center and it was directly entered from outside. So, I really wasn't going to be moving the cancer center per se. So even though it looks like it's part of the basement, it really had a lot of natural light and it was really was not too bad. Whoop. Going up to the first floor, this is the old entrance right here. So I put the building here and with a new atrium kind of lobby here. So you were able to enter, go into this building and into my building, into the new building. And so it simplified the wayfinding on site. And this became a new imaging platform right here because this was emergency right here. I gave some ability to expand the emergency room and then added observation, a women's clinic, and there was still some administrative functions that were off to the side. So we reused some of the older buildings, for administration. Going up to the second floor, in the ideal world for me, it should be all the procedures. And so I was able to expand and create 16 new ORs here in the new building. That allowed me to have kind of backfill the old surgery and expand that for the prep and recovery. This was the obstetrics. So this was where women came in, gave birth. And the real nice thing here was I was able to have that on the same level as what's called a cesarean section room. So that's if a woman cannot deliver vaginally, then, and they have to have some sort of intervention, then you can go right to an OR, and that was right on the same level. And I was able to reuse actually the old outpatient surgery, which I now consolidated all surgery here. But I was able to move endoscopy, which is, I'm more of an outpatient, and it is kind of a rapid turnaround. So I was able to move that from kind of substandard space, right into, pretty nice space. And then going up to the upper floors, adding more beds on the third. It ended up being the third, fourth, and fifth floor. And also capping it with penthouse, and also bringing the helipad, which was on site on grade, and bringing that up so there's a dedicated elevator that would go right down to emergency. So a lot of those relationships are kind of ideal. They don't always work out this way, but that's kind of an example of where it turned out pretty nicely.
Yeah, it's nice to see how the tools kind of lead to a specific example.
Right. And then kind of delving into more of the rural work I do. I came up with kind of some rural planning guidelines. This was a small hospital in Louisiana, and actually this building, we had to completely get rid of this older building. Some of the stuff back here was pretty good. And the big challenge in healthcare is phasing, because hospitals are 24/7. So it's not like you can the building's empty and you can do work, on a third shift or something like that. So you always have to find ways to build on, either vacate buildings and take them down, but that's usually not very feasible because they're using every square foot. So you usually have to find a space on the site, that can work. So you can begin to initiate the phasing process. In this scheme, we were able to create new beds here. So that worked really nicely with the ED and the imaging and the lab, and then consolidate all the outpatient. Again, a new entrance, you could go outpatient, you can go inpatient. But in a little more detail, I really look at, kind of 5 big goals for my rural work. And one is wayfinding, simplify it. Many times these smaller hospitals used to be maybe 100-bed hospitals, maybe 40 years ago, when the average length of stay, you'd get your tonsils out and you'd be in the hospital for 10 days. Well, now that's an outpatient, and everything else, other things are outpatient. So the number of beds has really dramatically reduced, but they still have all the space. So they still have people coming in and all different entries, and it's nice on a smaller scale to just consolidate and make one single point of entry. The second is just consolidating the acute care function. So that's surgery, it's imaging, it's emergency lab. And as I mentioned, the consolidating all the inpatients as well. And here, expanding and consolidating all of the various clinics and outpatient function services that they had, that were kind of dispersed all over the site. And then the other big piece is, if you have an inpatient world and an outpatient world, you really can't duplicate the services that serve both. It's asked to be a really centralized kind of point of shared support. So that's another thing that I look at, pretty closely when I'm trying to, put plans together. So those are kind of some of the tools.
Nice. Yeah, it's really, I think it's great seeing that. It just makes my my mind go a bit at both the tools and just the kind of high level analysis you did about your business model at the beginning, just kind of make my mind think about what would the analogs be for the practice that I'm building. And I want to just take a second to say, does anybody have a question for David or anything that they wanted to share related to tools or their process?
Question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
David, I know you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but could you talk more about the transition? Because, this is kind of a specific, you had so much expertise that maybe in hindsight it feels like a natural transition, but, it's a big leap to bring your services to clients, not with a larger firm behind you.
Yes, absolutely. I never in a million years thought that I would have this kind of second act of my career. I thought I would retire with the gold watch from, TRO, and that would be it. But in the 2008, 2009, certainly that the economic landscape kind of jolted our firm, and we had also just merged with John Brannon, who was a much more of a developer-driven kind of generalist firm. They did pretty much everything but healthcare, and while TRO was just healthcare specific. And so on paper, it looked like a really nice match, but it was the cultural fit was a disaster. And so there was kind of that upheaval. We also had a leadership CEO transition in 2010. And I was put on the committee not to, to think about a new CEO, but also to think about kind of repositioning the firm, because we lost all of that developer work, with the 08, 09. But we held on to our healthcare clients because they certainly still needed, to be doing projects. So I was put in charge, for better or for worse, of positioning, and I tried to do it with the most unbiased view, but I was a healthcare guy too. And I really felt we had to refocus, kind of, we had purchased a couple of smaller in distress firms around the country to try to leverage as local. And that really wasn't working either. So I said, we got to get rid of that. We've got to go back to what we have a right to win, work, and that's really doing healthcare. But everyone that was kind of left and invested in the merger and a kind of a bigger look disagreed with me. So they actually showed me the door in 2011. I had no plans. There was no, I as a planner, I hadn't planned for this. So I did get a couple of offers from a couple of larger healthcare firms in Boston, but thought, you know what? Maybe this is an opportunity to take control of how I wind down my career. And because I'd never seen anyone really retire on their own without being kind of nudged toward the door. So I gave myself a couple of years. I mean, luckily my kid was just going to college, but all the money was there for that. We had paid off the mortgage. We didn't have, there wasn't a ton of economic, kind of drivers saying, I need to have, a certain income coming in. So I was terribly fortunate that I had that flexibility. And then just serendipitously, if that's a word, I had a niche kind of expertise that I could leverage on my own. And because I knew I didn't really want to hire people. I didn't want to have that pressure of feeding the beast. So and I also had a pretty robust network of not only clients but also healthcare consultants that I could partner with. And I probably get 75% of my work now through the guy that I do all these charrettes with. So it's worked out a zillion times better than I ever dreamed. And I really can, I can just turn the lights out whenever I want. But I still love it. It's not by any means a full-time job, and it allows me to do a lot of other stuff in healthcare too that I'm interested in, as far as healthcare policy change and doing some teaching and things like that. So I would say if you're thinking, if people want to transition, I know you guys are pretty much all transitioned to small format, but if you're in a larger firm, get the expertise, and that might give you more flexibility and how you might be able to partner with other folks. Because I think partnering now is very well thought of, and also just seems to be a natural. I remember getting RFPs 10, 15 years ago, and you had to do that matrix of here's all the consultants, here's all the projects you've worked on together and all of that. I don't see that as a concern on the client's point of view at all anymore. I just see they're kind of trusting, maybe it's false trust through technology and all of that you're going to put together, the best team and the best set of experts to, for the project. But things have changed.
I was going to ask, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say sorry, my video is very lagging. That was great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I was going to say, remind me on the dates on this. I feel like you finished in 2015, maybe the master's at Brown.
Yes.
I was wondering kind of what made you feel like that was a thing you wanted to do, and how / if, that helped clarify what you're up to?
Yeah, I think it did. And the light went off for me when I went out on my own and I suddenly tried to position myself as a consultant and not an architect for hire. And that kind of allowed me to go into a strategic realm that was much higher valued by the client. They didn't see me as, you get those the RFPs where you're termed the vendor, and how kind of discouraging that is. I was not thought of as the vendor. I was thought of as a consultant, and I was being valued for my knowledge, but also for my recommendations and from my kind of experience and wisdom. And that allowed me to just go to a whole nother plane. But it also got me thinking, I know the facility piece pretty well, but I don't really know, their business maybe as well as I should. And so that it was great because I was able to the Brown program was an executive program. So we met, it was over 18 months, I think. And we met we had like 30 people in the cohort. And I was the only architect. Most of the folks were either physicians or people in in the hospital world. So actually I did it in the back of my mind as kind of a marketing thing too, because all of a sudden, and that hospital in Freehold, New Jersey was one of my classmates. He was one of the executives there. And so I got, we worked together and he's, a great friend too. So, but I thought, I've got to expand kind of my window into the healthcare universe and learn more about strategy and learn more about the finances and learn more about business models and operations and stuff like that. So, it gave me kind of a high level introduction to a lot of different areas of the healthcare industry that I think has just made me more valuable when I'm sitting at the table. I can participate, not just, and raise my hand when it's the architect's turn, I can chime in on a lot of different other topics.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of the things you have talked about with me, because I guess I'm nosy, was you mentioned when Cadence asked her question about how it's by no means a full-time thing. I think, and this gets into me being nosy, so you're welcome to just fully not answer this, but does what you're doing now kind of compensate you as if it were a full-time thing? And if no, I'm just wondering if you could tell us, in a given year, maybe how many engagements ish you're doing, so that we kind of understand. We don't need to know exactly how much money you're making. I just I think that was also one of the things that excited me, was that, like you were just saying, kind of entering, leveraging your expertise as a consultant and packaging this in this way that has defined benefits for clients, like it's very quick, it's very thoughtful, and, gives them kind of a goalpost and marching orders. I think, I think I'm also excited about how you have, kind of packaged that, and what your kind of yearly schedule looks like.
Yeah, I would say if you look at 40 hours a week over 50 weeks, I probably work, if you look at hours, I probably work 30% of the hours, on client work. At TRO, I was compensated with a base salary, and then I was a stockholder. So in good years, I'd get a pretty good bonus, based on, how we did. But there are also some leaner years where I didn't get a bonus. But working the 30% hours and getting compensated on that, I make more than my base salary as a partner.
That makes me so happy. Just because I feel like, I don't know. It's not because I'm this like, whatever capitalist. I just think it's, and I truly mean it in an authentic way where I'm like happy for you. I'm not transferring this and imagining a future in which I mimic this business model. I just think I'm just excited. I think a lot of and this is just speaking from my own perspective about having a lot of friends that have started practices and moved away from that or whatever. But I think often the sort of like bar talk amongst architects is that you can't make a living wage doing what we do. And so I think I hope that's just like gallows humor, like that hasn't been my experience to date, but I also feel like I have had a lot of good luck and, all that stuff. But it's
Right.
exciting, I think, to hear you say that because it feels like, you know, it's an alternate business model that I think many people could consider some version of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the shift in mind from getting compensated as an architect to being compensated as a consultant. I mean, I probably have 6 to 8 engagements a year, maybe. They're not all the charrettes. I mean, last year I had a couple of longer term engagements with Sasaki. Yeah, I'm kind of their go-to guy when there's because they do a lot of academic campus planning, and many times there's a medical school or a hospital even on the site. So I help them with kind of that part of the site. So I've been able to partner with other architects too, many smaller architects who want to get into healthcare and can kind of leverage my portfolio and my resume, to as part of the team. So that certainly works as well.
But yeah, Suzanne. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I was just saying I was eating lunch, so I have to say this was a very surprisingly pleasant presentation for you to share. So thank you, David.
Oh, you're welcome.
I was wondering, so I'm in the field of sustainability,
Okay.
and so there's definitely that sustainability consultant, throughout the project. But I have done some consulting on the side. I didn't realize this was your area. It was just that upfront strategic planning before you actually put the scope of work together for a project, so you understand the full pricing and stuff. And I was wondering, mine are mainly word of mouth referrals. And so I was wondering how you go about with the business development. Is it mainly just based on all your previous contacts that you had in the industry, or?
Yeah, I try to be, I use LinkedIn a little bit. As I mentioned to Kyle, I think most of my client network is retired. So I really rely on my buddy John to get me these charrettes. I usually have nothing to do with them, other than the fact that we have had repeat charrettes where a CEO has gone to another small hospital and he's brought us in. So I feel like I have a little bit to say with that as a repeat customer, but most of them are through John, and he works for Stroudwater Associates. Their niche is rural healthcare consulting, so they have a really great network, and I try to keep my nose to the ear to the ground, but yeah, it's been, if I had to just rely on me and my own, it would have been really, really difficult,
Yeah.
really difficult.
So the magic trick is to partner up on their leads there.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's like kind of go on the coattails. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Thanks.
Yep.
Just wondering if anyone else had any questions. I told David at the beginning of this that I came to reviews today that were weirdly scheduled like 20 minutes before this ends. And so like I'm late, but anyway, Susie couldn't make it today because college visits and stuff with the children. But I think we have time for like one more question if anybody has one. Okay. Well, David, thank you so much for presenting. It's
You're
always
welcome.
incredibly inspiring to see how you built your practice, and just nice to talk with you. And thank you all for coming. I know we all get like Zoom fatigue, so it's very meaningful when people give up their lunch hour to spend time with us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And if
Thanks, David.
anybody has questions or comment or things that kind of come across your mind, by all means, I think, Kyle, I think I'm with the LinkedIn group now.
Yeah, I invited you, so I think if you accepted, you're there.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk with you. And in fact, I'm excited about becoming part of the group. So
And if anybody's not part of, you're welcome. No pressure, but if you're on LinkedIn, we have a BSA Small Practices Network group. And if you request, Susie or I will give you access within like a day. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Have
okay,
a good rest of your day.
Bye.
bye.